Hello SLPs, this is our welcome video and an overview of what WisCCA is and who is our team. So first, I want to wish you all well as you begin this new school year. I know it can be very busy and challenging, yet exciting as you start a new school year. I also wanted to welcome you to the project and let you know that John and I are very excited to work collaboratively with you this school year throughout the modules, and we hope that you'll learn a few new things about assessment from us, and we also look forward to learning from you. So with that, let's get started. What is WisCCA? WisCCA, or the Wisconsin Collective for Comprehensive Assessment, is a grant partnership between the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee and the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, or DPI, and it's meant to really support SLPs. So this grant is funded through IDEA Part B, and it's also known as a FISC grant, or a Federal Investments for Statewide Systems Change grant. And this grant was open to individual districts and CSAs across the state, and your district applied and was part of a select few districts that were awarded the grant. So WisCCA is a 2-year grant that is meant to provide professional learning as well as continuous improvement to support your district, including administrators and SLPs, to really build capacity in your schools and your district in completing comprehensive assessments and really focusing on that educational impact and student outcomes. As we're all very well aware, about 2 years ago, DPI introduced that rule change for the speech language impairment criteria. And this new criteria change was really designed to ensure that we're completing comprehensive assessments that result in accurate identification decisions and a strong understanding of the academic and functional needs of students with communication needs so that we can really develop educationally relevant IEPs. Because of this rule change, feedback was shared by SLPs that the change has been mostly positive, but there is limited support for many of the recommended practices, which is what sparked the idea for the grant. So throughout this video, we're going to touch on the surface of a few topics. We'll provide some background and insight regarding the WisCCA grant, and know that some of the topics we touch on briefly will be discussed in much more detail in the future months and modules. Before we jump into more background on the grant, who is the WisCCA team? Like I stated previously, this grant is a collaboration between UW-Milwaukee and DPI. So from UW-Milwaukee, we have myself, Alyssa Watina, and we have John Heilman. From DPI, we have Dawn Mirth Johnson. I am the project manager and statewide coordinator for the WisCCA grant. Prior to joining WisCCA, I was a lead SLP in the Eau Claire School District, and I worked with students ranging from early childhood all the way to middle school for several years. I oversee the day-to-day operations of the grant. John is a professor at UW-Milwaukee and is the grant project director. He supports the day-to-day work as well, but he does more of the behind-the-scenes work, such as grant management, budgeting, and research. His research interests include language assessments and school-based practice. Dawn is also part of the WisCCA team. She is the education consultant for speech language and assistive technology at DPI. She is an ASHA State Education Advocacy Leader, and she worked as a school-based SLP for several years before joining the DPI team. So some background information that led to the WisCCA grant includes noting that students with speech and/or language impairments are at a significant risk for poor academic and social outcomes. The research has demonstrated this time and time again. In Wisconsin, 21% of students with IEPs are identified with a speech language impairment, and roughly half of all students identified with other disability categories like autism, intellectual disability, or significant developmental delay receive services from an SLP. The changes to the speech language impairment criteria were really intended to support SLPs to focus less on norm-referenced assessments and more on those functional academic assessments. By doing this, it leads us to more accurate identification decisions and really places a greater emphasis on that educational impact of speech language impairments and communication. With more accurate identification decisions, there's also more equity in the services that we provide. Through better comprehensive assessments and needs thinking instead of label thinking, we can really develop IEPs with a greater emphasis on those academic and functional skills to improve students' access, engagement, and progress in age or grade level, curriculum, instruction, and environments. As we know, best practice in assessment really includes using multiple assessment tools and data sources to get that whole picture of a student. So this might include a combination of observations, teacher, family, student reports, as well as data that you gather from various assessments like norm referenced assessment, criterion referenced assessment, dynamic assessment, or language samples. When completing these assessments, we also need to be culturally and linguistically responsive to our students and their families. By utilizing the various techniques and tools, we also ensure that we're gathering data from multiple perspectives and multiple contexts so we can really understand those strengths and needs a student may have. Once we've gathered all this comprehensive information, comprehensive data, we can converge all that evidence to really make decisions. So we can use those multiple pieces of assessment data to determine a trend in the same direction indicating needs or not. Or in our case, identification of a disability and a need for special education due to that educational impact. Over the past several years, DPI has also shared various resources and information on needs versus labels mindsets. And within a comprehensive evaluation framework, IEP teams approach referrals for initial special education evaluations or a request for a re-evaluation with that whole student in mind and with that ultimate goal of identifying their strengths and needs. By focusing that evaluation process on exploring the student's needs rather than primarily on labeling, the IEP team is really able to make that ultimate evaluation decision as to whether the student needs special education services as a result of a disability. Sometimes it can be challenging to utilize the comprehensive evaluation framework suggested by DPI for various reasons. We all know that time and workload are very real and very impactful reasons, so please know that we're not discounting those reasons and their impacts. Some other reasons, though, include limited focus on comprehensive assessments in our training programs. I'm sure we all had some sort of language assessment course in grad school that touched briefly on things like language sampling and dynamic assessment, but possibly had a greater focus on norm reference tests. Another reason the comprehensive evaluation framework can be challenging at times is the constraints that some of the recommended assessment practices have. So for example, not all of us have access to certain tools such as SALT for language sampling. Time is another barrier, so the time it takes to collect, transcribe, and analyze a language sample to really get meaningful information. For dynamic assessment, knowing what skills to target and what a dynamic assessment might look like for those skills, and then how to interpret that modifiability for a student. We all live in a data-driven world in education, so at times, norm reference assessments might feel safer or more comfortable, but they may not always be the best tool to rely on. I'm sure you can think of several more reasons that might impact our ability to complete comprehensive assessments, but we're going to keep moving forward. Now that we know what the problem is, how are we going to really support SLPs and work through better comprehensive assessments for students with communication needs? So first, we're going to provide some professional learning surrounding assessment. The professional learning within the WisCCA grant is designed to be in a module format. And a module will take about a month, and it's going to focus on various assessment practices such as norm reference, criterion reference, dynamic assessment, language sampling, along with some other topics like converging evidence and educational impact. In the first week, you will get an asynchronous training video that's about 30 minutes long. And at the end of the video, we will suggest an application activity for weeks 2 and 3, which involve trying something out with a student on your caseload to really apply your learning. In week 4, we'll hold a virtual community of practice meeting in which we'll discuss that content, application activities, what went well, what was challenging, questions you might have, etc. Overall, these activities will take a few hours each month, and we have organized the schedule to include a lighter module load in September as you're setting up your caseloads and figuring out your schedule and adjusting back to school, and then in December and March due to breaks, and then again at the end of the year because we know it can be busy, you get that influx of evaluations. And some of this learning is really meant to be built into your day-to-day activities that you already do with your students. And one note that we wanted to make is that nothing done within the grant is meant to be used to evaluate an SLP's skills or performance. So that is not the goal of the grant. Our goal is to be collaborative and supportive and really walk alongside you in refining and developing better comprehensive assessment practices. So we know there can be some anxiety and uncertainty when external groups come in to support a district, but we want to make that very clear. It's not tied to anything such as educator effectiveness. In addition to that professional learning, we will also be providing continuous improvement supports to your district and your SLPs. Assessing students with disabilities requires strong technical competence from SLPs, coupled with strong administrative supports that are responsive to SLP needs. So in addition to training and the community of practice meetings, your district administrative team will work with the WisCCA team to really enhance district level systems to support best practices in assessment. So we will guide your district leaders through continuous improvement processes or cycles of problem solving. And continuous improvement requires that the administrative team collects data to understand facilitators and barriers to successful practices, where the roadblocks are, where some opportunities are, and then based on that information, identifying strategies to overcome those barriers and implementing a plan to support. The team then collects additional data to determine if the strategies were successful or not. So this is a plan, do, study, check, act cycle as noted on the image on the slide. The WisCCA's team role is really to support the district in collecting the data, analyzing it, and summarizing it so that the team can use it to really understand and implement strategies to support needs. So an example of this might be something like, let's say your SLPs are working to incorporate dynamic assessment more into their evaluations, but teachers and families are struggling to understand this type of assessment when you're in an evaluation meeting or something like that. So the WisCCA team and your district team will work together collaboratively to work through the barriers associated with this to provide supports. So overall, we really aim to support your district leadership team to learn more about how to best support you as SLPs so that you can best support your students. So like we had said in the beginning, the WisCCA grant was a competitive grant application process. We had several districts and CSAs apply across the state, and a limited number were selected as grant recipients. So this grant is really focusing on supporting students who receive special education services, and it is the first grant that is specifically focusing on speech and language and SLPs. So your district is receiving money over the next 2 years, the 2023-2024 school year and the 2024-2025 school year, to participate in this grant and has committed to supporting you with time and resources. And like I said, we had a large number of applicants and lots of interest, and your district had a strong application and then demonstrated a strong commitment to supporting their SLPs in follow-up meetings. So your district really has committed to supporting you throughout this grant, and of course, we will work collaboratively with them to really reinforce this commitment. Over the next few weeks, you will receive a few more short videos orienting you to the project, providing you with a learning plan for the year, as well as how to navigate the modules and materials and what to expect in community of practice meetings. Then at the end of September, beginning of October, depending on your district specific schedule, we will begin the module learning format. So you'll receive a training video in week 1 with ideas for an application activity in weeks 2 and 3, and then we'll hold our first community of practice meetings near the end of October. Please always feel free to reach out to myself or John. You can also reach out to Dawn, but John and I are really going to be your first point of contact if you need support, you maybe are behind, you feel confused, you're not sure what to do. We are more than happy to meet with you, to exchange some emails to really support you through this process. So in the next coming weeks, look for some more introduction videos, and then in October, you'll receive an email that kind of outlines the plan for the month with some reminders and supports built in throughout as well. And again, John and I are very excited to get going, and we look forward to working with you.